My check 1 2, it's the Y2K collector, and enthusiasts of emulation hate when proponents of physical game collecting make this statement, but we have to admit for the times when it's actually true. And we are seeing an example yet again with the Switch 2 online service for the GameCube is proving that retro video games, original physical video games, play better than any other type of emulation that you can find out there. Now, I know that there are many ways to emulate Nintendo games, specifically GameCube games, but I would think that there would be no better a company to emulate these games than Nintendo themselves. Yet, it seems that they fail to do this effectively with each iteration of a console that they bring to their online service. We saw it with the N64, and now we're seeing it with the GameCube. Now, the thing is that a lot of people who play these games on the Switch online service are more casual gamers. They're not gamers who try to speed run these games, or they may not even have there may not even be attempting to beat the game particularly. They're probably just playing it a little bit here and there for nostalgia's sake, but they're not necessarily trying to seriously beat these games on the Switch online service. So the addition of the GameCube feature is really more of a novelty than necessarily something that I think a lot of gamers will actually use to play these games. I could be wrong, but that's just my thought process. Nevertheless, we're seeing where there's some significant issues when trying to play GameCube games on the Switch Online service versus the original GameCube. And the two that stick out the most to me are going to be one, the sensitivity with the analog stick, where some games just aren't calibrated properly to be able to provide the accurate sensitivity of motion when moving the analog stick in any direction. In a lot of cases, we're seeing where the sensitivity is a bit too high, and if you barely move the analog stick a little bit, the character or the vehicle in whatever game you're playing might move a little bit too far or a little bit too fast than anticipated, or rather a little bit more than what was originally presented in the game's original format. So that's one issue that we're seeing. Another issue that we're seeing is the obvious input lag. And for me, input lag is the biggest issue that I've always had with emulation. Doesn't mean that I'm absolutely against emulation or that I hate emulation, but I do think that this is a challenge with emulation when trying to use emulation to play certain games. Now, I think that the input lag thing doesn't really matter as much when you're playing rather more slower paced games, or games that don't necessarily require precise inputs. And that's typically going to be your turn-based RPGs. If you're playing a turn-based RPG, you don't necessarily have to have lightning quick responsive inputs that match down to the millisecond. You don't necessarily need that because you can take your time. It's a slower paced game. And there's really not a lot of moving parts working against you in the game. But when you take a game like Ikaruga, which was probably the best shoot 'em up on the GameCube, one of the best shoot 'em ups of its era, in my opinion. This is definitely probably top 10 shoot 'em ups of all time if you ask some people. But if you take a game like Ikaruga is a very fast-paced, top-down cave style shoot 'em up that requires precision movements, precision timing, and you really have to be on your P's and Q's when you're playing a game like this, because the pace of this game is extremely fast. And when you have an input lag that could last up to anywhere between half a second and a whole second, that could mean the distance between getting blown out the sky or actually dodging an enemy attack. And a lot of times for folks who play games like this, precision is extremely important. This is one of the biggest reasons why, as much as I like the mini consoles that we got over the last 5 to 10 years, when they initially started coming out with like the NES Mini and the Sega Genesis Mini and the Sega Genesis Mini 2, I thought these mini consoles were great. But the biggest issue and the biggest flaw that I saw with them immediately was the input lag. especially with the Sega Genesis mini consoles, because of course, those consoles had some of my favorite shoot 'em ups on them, specifically the Sega Genesis Mini 2. That was a console that had Lightning Force, or otherwise known as Thunder Force 4, which is a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. And there was a very, very huge difference in my performance when playing that game on an original Sega Genesis, because I do have the game in its original format on the Sega Genesis. I have the physical cartridge, versus when I would play it on the Sega Genesis Mini. I noticed that my ability to dodge was severely hamstrung by the input lag on the Sega Genesis Mini 2. And I've actually streamed that game on my channel before, and there's just a huge difference in my ability to make it through the game. A lot of times these fast-paced games, you're working off adrenaline, you're working off instinct, and you have to be able to move quick. Now, the same thing goes for a game like F-Zero, the racing, or not even just F-Zero, but any racing game on the GameCube, whether it be Mario Kart Double Dash, Kirby's Air Ride. A lot of these games are very fast-paced racing games. So when you have a combination of poor input lag, as well as analog sensitivity that doesn't correlate with the parameters of the original game, it makes someone who's looking to actually play and beat these games or excel in these games, it makes it challenging, because now you have to adjust and account for input lag, which is just not a very pleasurable experience, especially if a lot of your skills or your skill set has been built playing the games on their original format. And this has been my biggest issue when it comes to any type of emulation. This isn't an issue that's exclusive to Nintendo or the GameCube online service. This is just an issue with emulation in general. And that's why I provided the Sega Genesis Mini example with Lightning Force versus playing it on the original hardware. And so we're seeing this now with the GameCube online service. And I think the general public won't necessarily care about this because, again, adding GameCube to the Switch online service to me feels like a novelty. It feels more of just like, not a gimmick, but it's like a, hey, check this out. You know, if you want to, relive some moments of nostalgia and you want to go ahead and check out a little bit of Wind Waker again, go ahead and do that. You can do that with our Switch online service. But in my opinion, I don't think anything will ever beat playing these GameCube games on their original format. And the same could be said with the N64, the same could be said with the Sega Saturn, the same could be said with the Sega Genesis. But we're just kind of getting to see some of these examples now, and we're able to see how severe the input lag is when you see some of the examples provided by YouTube content creators such as Modern Vintage Gamer, when he demonstrated his example of the input lag. And again, this isn't going to matter with every game that you play. It's only going to matter with certain games that really require that precision. So really, this, I think, is going to affect a certain type of gamer. And I think only certain individuals are really going to be bothered by this. I think in general, for me, this is a big part of the reason why no matter how many online services and emulation services, and no matter how many of these things come out, I'm always going to hold on to my original physical hardware because it's the best way to experience the game. It doesn't mean that you can't have fun emulating games, but playing them on their original format is the best way to experience them for me. A lot of people say that they don't want to have to struggle with the cords and the cables of setting up a console, and there's a certain ease of use. That might all be well and good and true, but there are just some games that you absolutely cannot emulate. Another example would be a game like Super Metroid. Super Metroid was a game that was made available on the SNES Classic, or the Super Nintendo mini console that we got a while back. But for those who have played Super Metroid and are used to speedrunning these games, you'll know that there's just certain maneuvers and certain moves that are just much more difficult to pull off when playing the NES Mini versus putting in an original Super Metroid cartridge into a Super Nintendo and playing this game in its original format. There's just something to be said for that. And I know it's only a second, or I know it's only a half a second, but that second or half a second can mean the difference between passing a level, beating a boss, or being sent to the game over screen. So you guys let me know what you think about this. I thought that this is very interesting. I am excited that Nintendo brought the GameCube to the Switch Online service, but at the same token, um, I feel like if I'm gonna play these games, any of these games seriously, I'm just going to play them on the original format. If I just want to tinker around and just, goof around in a game, yeah, I'll use the Switch Online service for that. But if I'm really trying to get in there and beat the game and actually make it to the final boss and end the game, the original format is the best way for me. But let me know your thoughts on this. Have you experienced the GameCube on the Switch Online service yet? Have you played any of the games? Have you done your own comparison between playing original hardware and playing it on the online service? I'm interested to know your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.